I'm here at the Singapore Turf Club, and I'm reliably informed by my director that there's a splendid beast by the name of Son of Fala who will sweep the field. It's a story I'd like to believe.
Set. Racing now and have a chance to begin okay.
Julian's knowledge of history is somewhat better than his knowledge of horses, and his money's riding on a contender that seems to be trailing the field. But perhaps there's still time. Will number 6 rocket to the front? Apparently not.
Well, there goes next month's rent. And there goes my director. Running considerably faster than the horse he just recommended, I might add. So, while I consider my losses, let's hear something a trifle more positive about Singapore's Sport of Kings.
The Sport of Kings didn't achieve majestic dimension until the Singapore Sporting Club was established in 1842. And in 5 short months they built a racecourse at Farrer Park and held their first race meeting in 1843.
Farrer Park was also a golf course for a while, and even served briefly as Singapore's first airfield. The site still exists today as a lush green park alongside Little India. But it's doubtful if there's anyone still around who can recollect the area in its heyday.
Not everyone found it necessary to attend the actual meeting to enjoy the race carnival. Often, nearby rooftops were sufficient, such as this one.
Well, I'm up here on the roof of the Ellison building on the corner of Seligi Road and Bukit Timah. And up until a couple of years ago, there was a coffee shop downstairs on the corner, and it was named the Colonial Bar. And there's a good reason for that. Because in the old days of the British, when horse racing still used to take place at Farrer Park over there, the Brits used to come up, no doubt fortified by a whiskey or two, and watch the racing from the rooftops. Not a bad way to spend an afternoon, don't you think?
Though the sport was originally dominated by Europeans and Malay royalty, it soon attracted a following amongst wealthy Chinese immigrants. By the end of the 19th century, the biannual spring and autumn race meetings had become social events for everyone.
In 1924, the Singapore Sporting Club changed its name to the Singapore Turf Club, the better to reflect its activities. I do wish those people would stop staring at me. Most disconcerting. Anyway, by the late 1920s, the racetrack at Farrer Park had grown a little bit run down and dilapidated, and it couldn't really accommodate the increasing numbers of racegoers who were turning up to the events. So the Turf Club decided to move to another location.
In 1933, on the site of what was once a rubber plantation, the Bukit Timah racecourse was completed and was rightfully applauded as the finest racecourse in the East. Though now replaced by Kranji, it's still there today, but only just.
Well, I'm very lucky to be able to come out to the old Bukit Timah Turf Club and to talk to someone who's actually ridden and raced here. Constance, can you tell me something about what it was like in those days when you were an amateur jockey here?
Yes, I'm an amateur jockey. I've been racing for the past 30 years.
Wow.
In Australia, in Malaysia, in Singapore, and I find this is the most wonderful track that I have raced on.
That's a beautiful setting, I must say.
And with a very good natural greenery, hilly surroundings.
When you first started riding and racing here, what was the difference between then and now, the racing today?
The ambience is much better at that time. The atmosphere, of course, is also much better, more live. The grandstand is more designed with more
beautiful.
open space.
Right.
It is more like Western countries where they have this carnival with picnic.
Like Ascot or something like that, champagne and picnic baskets.
And with their family kids to come along to see the races and enjoy in the race course.
Great, that must be lovely in those days.
Just across town off Thompson Road, there's another equine residence, but these horses are not selected for speed. Their necessary qualities are dexterity, intelligence, and quick response to their riders' requirements on the sports field. They also need the patience to withstand an occasional tap on their fetlocks once they're in the thick of a brisk piece of play amongst swinging polo mallets.
I'm here at the Singapore Polo Club, beside the Police Academy on Upper Thomson Road, and I'm enjoying a Sunday afternoon's game of polo. It's a scene that would hardly have changed in the 117 years since the club was founded.
The sport of polo is often mistakenly believed to have British origins, but nothing could be further from the truth.
Lawrence, I understand that the game of polo originated in India, and it was a whole lot of men chasing after a dead animal or something like that.
Yeah, not really India. It began in Central Asia.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Up in the high mountains.
Yeah.
You know, I guess the people abroad have nothing else to do, and they are real good horsemen. So
Yeah,
they play this game with a carcass of a goat or something,
Yeah.
and they kind of pass it around and see
Yeah.
how they could score. And then later he came down to India. And what popularized it was when India became a British colony, the British picked it up and began to use it, especially in their cavalry.
Right.
Because it trains good horsemanship.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And then with that, they brought it back to England. And from England, the Argentine picked it up, and then it began to grow.
Really,
Become a
yeah.
worldwide thing. Well, we began way back, I think, with the British soldiers here, and they got us started. It used to be at Farrer Park.
Ah, really? Yeah.
You know,
race
and then,
course.
and somewhere between the First and the Second World War, that's
Yeah.
a long time ago,
Yeah.
we moved to this premise, and there was just nothing but a shed here.
Well, I remember the days when, you know, we didn't have this wonderful clubhouse. We had a tin shed. We didn't have beautiful drainage on the field. Every December, monsoon season, it would rain.
Yeah.
Water would come up to about there. Things would be floating around, horses swimming around, and we'd have to ride them across what is today the PIE to higher ground at the turf club.
Oh, really?
Yeah, at 5 in the morning, we used to get sort of these wake-up calls saying,
Yeah.
flood, flood.
Get the horses out of here.
Exactly.
Oh, gosh. The Polo Club is one of those places which has hardly changed since I was a boy. My mother used to drive past here on her way to and from cold storage in Orchard Road, and if a game was in progress, we'd pull over and watch for a while. To a 6-year-old, those horses seem pretty fearsome creatures. A sport that requires a great deal of skill, and not a little courage, I imagine. After the break, join me on the padang. Anyone for cricket?
Cricket had been played on this site on the Padang since the 1830s, but it wasn't until 1852 that the Singapore Cricket Club was formed. Beginning with a modest pavilion under tall angsana trees and graduating to something slightly more impressive in 1877, it was their third clubhouse, constructed 7 years later, that forms the central portion of today's magnificent landmark.
Did someone tell them I was coming? Looks like they're expecting me.
In 1907, it was renovated and added to, and took more or less its final form with the later construction of the north and south wings. A truly unique building and a world-recognized Singapore icon. The upper level was originally a ladies' viewing gallery, but these days it's open to all members, and even the occasional visitor, like this familiar fellow. Admittedly, the majority of Singaporeans remain totally bewildered as to why a group of grown men don lily whites and stand for hours in the hot sun doing what appears to be remarkably little. Cricket is clearly an acquired taste, but there's never a shortage of more than willing players. The game, like the clubhouse itself, firmly remains a local institution.
The Singapore Cricket Club. Hallowed ground. My father was a member here, and my grandfather. Quite possibly my great-grandfather too, when he wasn't at sea. He was the sea captain. I myself have a somewhat equivocal attitude towards the game of cricket. At the age of 10 at boarding school in England, I was diving spectacularly to make a catch, but instead the catch made me and knocked out my 2 front teeth. Matron said, whilst I was waiting for a taxi to take me to the dentist, I might as well go and look for the pieces. Couldn't find them. Probably knocked straight down my throat. Anyway, since that time, I've always found cricket to be a rather dangerous enthusiasm.
But a far more dangerous enthusiasm was regularly undertaken about 30 years back on this winding jungle fringe road, part of which was Upper Thomson Road. For more than a decade, this was Singapore's racing car circuit, and an extremely hazardous one.
It's extraordinary to think that men actually raced around this narrow and winding circuit at speeds in excess of 160 kilometers per hour. But that's probably the point. They were doing something that neither you nor I would ever dare to, and we took our hats off to them. "35 years ago, this is where they used to hold the Singapore Grand Prix. Not one of those designer circuits, but a real road racing affair, with all its attendant dangers: lampposts, bus stops, trees, and ravines. The Grand Prix used to attract quite an international field, but then of course there was the local hero, Lee Han Seng. He drove a Lotus with a Brabham engine, I recall, and everyone's money was always on him. It's a 5-kilometer circuit, and they used to average 150 kilometers an hour, reaching speeds of up to 250 kilometers an hour on the straight. And I think today I certainly wouldn't have the courage to drive around here at the speeds they were doing. This was the fastest part of the circuit, where the cars reached up to 250 kilometers an hour. There was a particularly tricky section was right here, where it turned a corner just as they were reaching top speed, and the cars got all light and feathery. More than 1 or 2 people flew off into the bushes here. And I have to say there were 1 or 2 fatalities each year, which is why the race was stopped in the end. I think the last Grand Prix was in 1973, and a couple of chaps were killed in practice, and they said, well, that's the end of it. It really is too dangerous now to continue. I have to say that there was a magnificent daring to those chaps who roared around this track 30 years ago for no financial reward, just simply for the sheer hell of it. I think the great British racing driver of the 50s and 60s, Stirling Moss, put his finger on it when he said something like, to race a car flat out through a turn when there's a level lawn on both sides, that's skillful. But to race a car through the same turn when there's a rock wall on one side and a precipice on the other, that's an achievement. Unfortunately, there was a price to pay. I knew a chap, Lionel Chan, who went off the road somewhere round about here whilst practicing for the 1970 Grand Prix. And that, I'm afraid, was the end of him. It's surprising many more weren't killed. There was a time long ago when small boys thought nothing of leaping into the Singapore River for a cooling dip. Though I must say, in my younger years, I felt no such compulsion myself. Back then, the Singapore River was little better than an open sewer. In fact, it was an open sewer. Literally thousands of people living on boats or at the water's edge. For my part, I was not about to immerse myself in that unholy quagmire, especially when there was the option of a visit to a splendid facility like this one at Tanjong Pagar. Unfortunately, the Yan Kit Pool seems to be rather quiet these days, but it wasn't always so. Looks like fun. Now, swimming pools were something that everyone could enjoy at relatively little cost to themselves. And unlike the Singapore River, you weren't likely to find yourself swimming past a dead dog or some other unspeakable horror. Some years ago, I used to come here every lunch break. The gardens were beautifully maintained in those days, and in some of the footbaths, they kept water lilies and goldfish. I do 30 lengths, followed by a curry puff. Good stuff. It was built just after the end of the Second World War, and it must have been a radical improvement for the lives of the people who lived in Chinatown in those days. Certainly in the early photographs you see that it's packed, and people all over the banks diving in, goodness knows. I particularly like the tropical Art Deco style of architecture and the beautifully sculpted diving boards. I also like these additional pools which are curved, rather like a wave formation, I used to think. And then of course at the end there's this fantastic marine mural, complete with octopus, jellyfish, mermaids, turtle, seahorses. It really is quite a delightful spot, an oasis of tranquility in the heart of the city. But sadly, it seems as if its days are numbered, which is a great pity, I think.
Another public pool that was hugely popular when it opened was the River Valley Swimming Pool. But its glory days have long gone and attendance slowly dwindled to a trickle. As affluence increased, private pools became available and the character of the area changed. The children who splashed in the shallows grew up and moved elsewhere. In mid-2003, the River Valley Swimming Pool finally locked the gate and pulled the plug.
And another one bites the dust.
Happy memories of a generation sadly gurgled away down the drain. But as one memory fades, another is rekindled.
The boats have returned to compete here once again, but this time they're somewhat noisier and a whole deal faster. And if it's a little bit too crowded to have a Grand Prix to the streets, well, there's plenty of room out here in the bay.
Watercraft on Marina Bay generally chug about at a sedate and leisurely pace, but they've all left for the day to let some sprightly younger cousins take a spin. It's October 23rd, 2003, and an absolutely magic sunny Sunday morning. A perfect setting for the Formula One Powerboat World Championship organised by the UIM, the Union Internationale Motonautique. It's the second time Singapore had played host to this prestigious powerboat championship, the first time being in 1992. But it's by no means the first time the harbour's seen the like of such aquatic competitions. The harbour had been used for boat racing long before, though admittedly of a slower and quieter kind. The New Year Regatta was first held in 1834, and for a while was an annual event. A social highlight that drew a huge turnout of spectators from the entire community. An occasion that provided an opportunity to challenge British teams on an equal footing and stand a reasonable chance of winning. The Malays and Orang Laut, or Sea Gypsies, were regular participants and frequently delighted the crowd by triumphing over the British crews. Britannia might have ruled the waves at the time, but she didn't always rule the harbour.
The Malay racing Kolek was a beautiful thing, but no less fascinating in their way are these remarkable F1 powerboats. With a good breeze, the Kolek could perhaps cover between 10 to 15 kilometers in an hour, by which time these modern speed machines would have reached Malacca. Capable of accelerating from 0 to 200 k's per hour in the next snapping 5 seconds, one tiny mistake could spell disaster. My grandfather was a member of the yacht club, and my father too, but in those days it was strictly sailboats, no engines.
The day wasn't all about horsepower. There was some manpower involved as well, with a more traditional boat race round the bay before the main event.
Pretty exciting stuff when they're up close. Even the fires of hell couldn't heat these guys up.
Amongst the spectators were President Nathan, Sultan Mahmud Iskandar of Johor, and Prince Fahd Al Saud of Saudi Arabia. Just 3 of the estimated 70,000 who lined Marina Bay to enjoy the action. 22 powerboats took part in the 60-lap race, the winner covering the course in 53.5 minutes. It was the Emirates F1 team that took line honours, and the event organisers are keen to return to Marina Bay, promising next time an even bigger and better spectacle. And we've got big and spectacular things in store next week too. In Matters Grave and Souls to Save, Julian's on the prowl in some mysterious places, as well as in some more predictable ones. He's off to investigate a mutiny and visits its outcome on the site of Outram Prison. And was there really a ghost at the old Victoria Theatre? All will be revealed next week.
I'll be back. Or at least I hope I will. To play or bet or just get wet. That was the title of this week's episode. And I fancy, just quietly, that a little bit of all of that is going on here this afternoon. As for myself, I'd like to get wet with an iced lemon tea. So until next week, goodbye and good luck. Bloody idiot up on the roof.